This week we've travelled to the west coast of Scotland and to a special place known the world over for its outstanding natural beauty. We're on the island of Skye. But apart from its physical beauty, Skye has a special place in our history. The story of Bonnie Prince Charlie escaping over the sea to Skye in the face of a pursuing English army reads like a novel, sounds like a legend, but is in fact true. He may have never won the throne, but it was here that he escaped with his life. The story of Bonnie Prince Charlie is really the story of the epic struggle for the throne between the Scottish House of Stuart and the German House of Hanover. That struggle resulted in the final defeat of the Highland army at the Battle of Culloden in April 1746. The Scottish prince was then pursued across to the Western Isles by English troops under the Duke of Cumberland. A young Jacobite supporter, 24-year-old Flora MacDonald, disguised the prince as her maid and, with the help of a local boatman, smuggled him over the sea to Skye, where they landed on the 28th of June 1746. Eventually, the young pretender escaped to France. The story of how Flora saved her prince from certain capture is now part of Highland legend. And as you would expect, Skye has its mementos of Bonnie Prince Charlie, and here at Dunvegan Castle are two of the most significant. This is an old Jacobite toasting glass. The toast was, "God save the King." Then the glasses were thrown in the fire, which is why so few survive. This one's important because it's inscribed to Donald MacLeod of Skye, who was the boatman who helped the prince and Flora MacDonald to escape. And just before they parted, Flora asked the prince for a lock of his hair to remember him by. And here, in Flora's locket, we have that final parting gift. They never saw each other again. Well, all of that helps to explain why Skye is such a popular tourist destination. And the new bridge linking the island to the Scottish mainland was built to take the ever-increasing flow of tourist traffic. Some 35 miles from the bridge, nestling around a well-protected harbour, is the small fishing town of Portree, and that's where we've come for this week's Antiques Roadshow. Our home for the day is the town's community centre. So let's now join our experts with the people of Skye.
Well, I have to say the most unexpected thing to see on the island of Skye is a collection of Martin ware. I'd never have believed it. And why have you got it?
Well, it's a family connection,
really?
Yes. My grandfather's sister was married to Robert Wallace Martin.
Good heavens.
The potter. And so many of the things we have, which were my father's collections, have never been out of the family.
That's amazing. So there's a direct family link with all these pieces.
Yes.
I think this is an extraordinary thing because the Martin brothers, one night, you can tell me rather than I tell you. I'm sure I shouldn't tell you anything, really.
Oh, I don't know about that.
But they were one of these extraordinary late Victorian studio potters. There were four brothers working in London, trained in Dolton, as a stonemason, all over the place, who set up in the early 1870s making what we would now call studio pottery. Can you tell me family secrets?
Not really. They were just looked on as totally eccentric.
Martin Brothers, Martin ware is a very distinctive type of pottery. I think you'd know a piece straight away, wouldn't you?
Yes.
One thinks immediately of the birds.
Absolutely.
These wonderful grotesque birds. They're based on a Roman form where the head comes off. Strictly speaking, they're a bottle and a cup, but they never are. I think they're just an expression of Victorian fascination for the grotesque. Each one is a personality, aren't they?
We always used to think of them as our father's friends.
Well, I'm sure they were.
Or they all looked like somebody we knew.
Ah, do you think they're caricatures of people?
Oh, yes, definitely.
You do?
And you said earlier that they were so easy to recognise. My father walked into an auction room in Carlisle where we lived many years ago.
Yes.
And there was one actually being auctioned. And he saw from the back of the auction room, he said, "That's a Martin ware bird." And he put his hand up and bid £5 for it.
And got it?
And got it.
Well, that was a long time ago, I have to say. Things have changed.
About 40 years ago,
yes, I mean,
50 years ago.
Do you know the value
of this? It wasn't that one, no, I don't.
I mean, in current marketing terms, we're looking at about £5,000 or £6,000 there, possibly more.
Really?
And one with a family link. I think you could raise the price a bit more. But of course, it isn't just the birds. They were very good at making salt glazed stoneware in a slightly Japanese style with incised decoration. There are parallels, of course, with what Doulton were doing at Lambeth. But the great thing about Martin ware, apart from decoration, of course, is that it's all clearly marked. There are the names on the bottom and very often the date, and Fulham or Southall or where they were made. Do you have a particular favourite amongst these pieces?
I like Mr. Pickwick.
He's wonderful,
in his
isn't
wheelbarrow.
It may be Mr. Pickwick, but it's actually some friend of theirs, I'm sure. You can see it was the kiln fireman after a few too many whiskies or something like that. I quite like this.
I like this one.
It's so different without the coloration, the decoration.
And it's unusual in being unglazed.
It's a great piece of sculpture.
And the face is wonderful
Face
when you
is
look
very,
closely
very
at
powerful.
it. Yes.
And I think it's David with his heart, probably, isn't
Sure
it?
it is,
Yes.
yes.
I mean, in price terms, as you probably know, I mean, this is probably about £1,000.
That's one of a pair.
Well, you could make it more then. That's such a quirky piece. You know, I think a collector would pay probably getting on for £1,000 for that. But everybody wants a bird. I think this is wonderful. I mean, it's really made my day.
I'm so
and I'm
pleased.
delighted to meet you and
Thank
delighted
you
to
very
see
much.
them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was told that they were Louis something, and I can't remember which Louis it was.
Well, they're definitely not Louis, they're George.
They're George. I
Louis,
see. Well,
Louis French, George English.
that's right, yes.
And these are very, very English candlesticks indeed. And
Oh,
they're-
good.
How long have you had them?
They belonged to my grandparents, but how long before that,
Before
I have no
that,
idea.
right. They were made in London in 1764, fully hallmarked, and there's a date letter there, date letter I for 1764. And you have there a leopard's head, a lion passant and a maker's mark over there for a man called Ebenezer Coker, who made them. He was a prolific candlestick maker. Mid-18th century, you find this sort of candlestick, which are called shell-cornered candlesticks
Yeah.
for the obvious reason they've got a shell at each corner.
Right.
And you find these from around about the 1740s until the late 60s. This is late-ish for them, 1764. But they're nice candlesticks, and they are a very standard pattern. And I suppose 10 years ago might have been looking at sort of 3,000. But today I think you'd probably be pushed to get 2,000 for them. 15 to 1,800 pounds, I would think, would be roughly speaking what you'd get.
The first thing you notice is the wonderful original colour and the beautiful original brasses. It just couldn't be better. Do you know where it came from?
Well, family came from northwest England, Manchester, Cheshire, Derbyshire.
Right, wonderful, because I would have said Shropshire myself.
Really?
Something somewhere like that, certainly northwest Midlands.
Yes.
At your end, you've got a wonderful sophistication, those raised panels with the crossed banding around it and the very simple thumb moulding. It's absolutely terrific. The brasses are totally original. All the drawers, and as I mentioned, the end panels have got mahogany cross banding. The piece itself, of course, is oak. I don't think I mentioned that, did I? Mahogany cross banding, which really enables us to date it. Because in the country, they weren't using mahogany on a piece of furniture like this until the middle of the 18th century. The legs and the feet, the cabriole legs with the pointed pad foot, would suggest that, in fact, its original design is much nearer 1720, 1730. But the fact it's got this type of brass and the mahogany must put it to the middle of the century, because in the country they just wouldn't have been using mahogany much before then. It's a lovely size and actually a very useful height.
Yes.
It's a curious height. Most dresser bases would be just a little bit lower. You've obviously loved it because there is no possibility that you could buy this in a sale, let alone from a dealer's showroom, for less than about £4,000. It's wonderful.
This quintessentially English seascape shows all the hallmarks of the youthful work of a man called James Webb, born in 1825, and by the middle part of the century was painting extremely accomplished seascapes. And this particular piece shows the influence of artists such as Turner and possibly even Bonington, who were the great seascape painters of the early part of the century. Had you thought that it was an English picture, or...?
No, I had no idea, but I thought it was Dutch, personally. And the brooch appeared to me to be Dutch.
Well, it's just possible that it's a scene either in Folkestone or even on the east coast of England, where, of course, a lot of Dutch fishing boats came in. So it's not impossible that that's the case, but certainly it is, without a doubt, by James Webb. And it's full of life and the quality of painting, and there's some wonderful impasto here as the waves break on the fishing boats, as the fishermen land the catch, and certainly here in the sails of the boats in the distance. It's very skillfully handled. Later on in his life, his works are rather more formal and very grand, and I think this actually has, in a way, a greater charm than a rather big set piece. Do you have it insured at all or anything like that? No.
Not particularly, no. Just the household insurance.
Household insurance. Well, such a nice youthful work, I think, would probably make between £5,000 and £6,000. And you ought to insure it for a little bit more than that, but they're very hard to come by in this sort of condition and this sort of quality.
I think are these seagulls?
They are seagulls, yes.
That's what I thought. My wife thought it was dirt.
We thought it was dirt. Well, don't try and clean them off, for goodness sake, because they're meant to be there.
A little bit there. It's nice to put a plant. Do you use it for a plant?
Yes.
Yeah. Mother-in-law's tongue or aspidus with the damage, about £20. They are getting quite collectible jardiniers like that again. People like aspidistras again.
Yeah.
So they're becoming popular. That's damage.
Give it a good pull, smooth but firm, that's it.
So the idea is for it to go through these hoops, is it?
That's right, yes, it goes 5, 10, 8 and 9 if it goes 2, 3.
So, I mean, it is like a bit like a pinball machine. I mean, was it, when you acquired it, how was it described to you?
It was sold to us as maybe a bagatelle.
It's, I'm sure, dating from 1900 and 1910, so late Victorian, very early Edwardian. I would have thought we're talking about perhaps 150 to £200.
But priceless to us.
Priceless to you.
What sort of an egg?
Emu.
Oh, an emu.
Yeah.
That's very, very nice, isn't it? An emu's egg. I bet they squawk a bit when they lay that.
Well, it's what the shape is what's called a loving cup. It's what we term printed and tinted.
Yes.
A printed brown outline and then coloured. You know, see the little jockey colours here, the blue and the pink and the green, is all just been added over the print. And we come to the maker, because the piece in fact is marked on the bottom.
Yes.
John and Robert Goodwin, who are Staffordshire makers, and they were working up until around 1860s or so. So we could safely date this piece at around 1850, 1860. And the value of the piece, because it's so big and so chunky and such a handsome piece, would be certainly in the region of £600 to £800.
Yes, thank you.
Really suits me down to the ground, this one. Are they old family pieces?
Yes, my aunt gave them to me 35 years ago.
And do you know how long she had had them?
Oh, probably another 40 years.
And they're actually typical of the early upholstered chairs in the early Victorian period.
Oh, yes.
If I just show you here, you've got this serpentine line here, this deep sprung seat. It's one of the first chairs to have this type of sprung, big steel coil springs inside there, And again, they've got the nicely padded back like this, very comfortable, and the padded arm like this. They're magnificent chairs, you know, you don't find them like this anymore.
No, you don't.
They're so comfortable.
They are.
And then you look at this mahogany, this is made of mahogany, this nice scroll here on all these leaves. This is an 1840 chair.
1840?
1840. Going back here with this decoration is going back to the 1740s, 1750s. It's a very popular style to revive this. But I think each one would make certainly £1,000
each.
So I think a pair of them you'd expect 2,000.
2,000.
£2,000 to £2,500 at auction.
My goodness.
But that means for insuring them, if you went to a shop to try and replace them,
yes,
3,000.
3,000.
So you've really got to look after them.
Thank you very much for all that information.
My great-grandfather may have acquired it in Paris. We have a passport from that date. He was in Paris shortly after the Franco-Prussian War. But that's just hazarding a guess.
The clock is indeed French, and the date of manufacture is going to be just around the turn of the century, maybe just before. But the most unusual thing is that it is not in a European style, it is of course very much in the Chinese style.
Yes.
Have you ever seen a bamboo case like this before?
No.
Well, if you can imagine that the average carriage clock has a fairly plain brass case.
Yes.
This one is actually moulded to form the branches of bamboo.
Yes.
And then all around we have these quite remarkable little panels, including the back door, which is nice because very often the back door which is not seen is glass. But all the way around these panels. Now, they're really almost surreal, aren't they? We've got these wonderful things going on in treetops and stylized lakes and accentuated bridges. Very much how, at the time, the Europeans might have perceived the Far East to be like. I can't actually shed any light on the maker because the movement is numbered right down there in the bottom left, but there's no factory stamp. I mean, it would have been lovely if it had been by Henri Jacquot or Drocor or one of the good makers, but in the absence of a stamp, I can't specify exactly who would have made it. But suffice to say that although dirty, it's still got its original lever platform, which is good.
It still works.
And, it could do with a little bit of a clean inside, to be honest. It's certainly the sort of thing that if you were replacing it retail, you would be looking in terms of towards £4,000. Other than the fact it's a little bit dirty, 100% fine.
I'm not sure whether that's Chinese or Japanese.
Well, it is the Chinese teapot. They love these bamboo handles. It's got these little ivory insulators, rather pretty bamboo spout, and really nice solid weight, and the cover fits nicely. It's a very, very attractive piece of silver. Where did it come from?
Actually, it came from my grandmother, and it came down to my grandmother through her sister.
Well, these were made for the European market. They weren't actually made for Chinese consumption. And Chinese silversmiths started making silver for the Europeans going back to about 1810. This is a particularly nice example because all this decoration is applied to the outside of the teapot. It's not just being embossed, but it's actually being cast and laid on. It's very typical. You've got all these prunus blossoms or cherry blossoms and little birds flying about. And it goes all the same way around the side, and a little bit of sacred fungus on the lid, and a very nice touch is this
that
little butterfly.
A butterfly, yeah.
It's a butterfly on the bottom.
That's right. So it is solid silver.
It is solid silver, yes. It's got two marks on it, one a Chinese mark, and the other one HC, which if I remember rightly is someone called Hung Chong. And all these pieces were made either in Hong Kong or Shanghai. I can't remember which one he comes from. Now, I mean, this isn't worth a fortune. We're not going to be able to retire on it, I'm afraid. But Chinese silver has become a lot more popular. 20 years ago, no one really wanted it at all. No one knew anything about it. But people started collecting it. There were a couple of books published on it, which raised the interest in it. And a teapot like this today would have a trade value of £600 to £800, and you should probably be insuring this for about £1,200.
When we got married, my wife and I decided that when we furnished the house we would get antique furniture because we like old things. And about 30 years ago we saw this table in an antique shop, we liked it, and we lived with it and loved it ever since.
Well, what is so nice about this is the way the gate legs opens, perhaps awkwardly, but rather amusingly and naively. You've got this very nice serpentine side on your side and my side and the front.
Yes.
And they haven't gone the one stage further. It's not a concertina action. Look at the colour. This beautiful, beautiful Honduras mahogany, beautifully grained, lovely colour, quite a weighty flat. It's really quite comparatively heavy. But again, just looking at the front here, you've got this marvellous egg and dart moulding here, and just wonderful bit of carving. Almost sort of taken from Elizabethan type decoration of Elizabethan jewellery of the sort of late 16th century. So that sort of look. Have you any idea what date the table is?
Well, we thought it was mid-18th century. It was sold to us as Chippendale, but
I think that Thomas Chippendale himself would not have designed a card table, although very sweet, slightly awkwardly, slightly naively with those two legs in the middle. Let's close it up again and look at that, because I think it's rather fun. But it's that Chippendale period of about the 1750, 1755 period. I think if we look in his director, we'll see similar features, but not identical features. And I couldn't tell you whether somebody's borrowed this from Chippendale or Chippendale's borrowed this from somebody else. What I think is fascinating to me is this almost trompe-l'oeil effect with the legs, because if you get it at one angle, it looks square.
Yes.
But in fact, they're sort of cut like a diamond, and more obviously here at the collar and the foot.
Yeah.
But it's such a weird, strange optical illusion as you travel round the table like that. I think with this arrangement of the legs, it possibly isn't a London piece. It's just a good major city piece, a major provincial city, but nobody could be sure about that. No. What I am sure about is it's a beautiful piece of antique furniture. Yeah. Do you remember what you paid for it that 30-odd years ago?
We thought we paid a terrible lot. I think we paid somewhere around £360.
What do you think it's worth today?
I suppose it's worth four figures, but I really do not know.
Well, it's certainly worth four figures, isn't it? It's certainly worth that. And I'm sort of hedging as I talk to you around even perhaps around £10,000.
Really?
Yeah.
Gosh.
I think it would cost you that in a shop today at least.
But we wouldn't sell it. It's part of the furniture and we love it.
About £150.
Yes.
That one. This one slightly less because, as you can see, it's a bit on the bent side.
Yes.
Do you know what it is?
Oh, it's we call it a fender. It sits in front of the fire.
That's quite right. It is a 17th century French adjustable fire fender or grate.
Yes.
It's got a date of 1674 on it, and there is no doubt whatsoever that is the genuine date. Oh. And it is very, very rare. In this time, they would actually fold up and take the fender with them every time they moved from room to room. Very unusual indeed. And I think that if you saw it on a specialist stand in a fair, I think you could possibly pay from £1,000 to £1,200 for it.
Gosh.
French, 1674.
There's just lumps of silver polish there.
So how do I clean it?
You don't.
Just pop it?
Yeah, you don't need to put any form of cleaner on it at all. It just gets through the holes, into the movement, and gunges it up over a period of years.
Now, one of the problems that occurs with virtually all forms of collecting is the problem of cleaning. Now, over-cleaning is a problem that you confront on the roadshow many times, Paul, isn't it?
Particularly in the case of bronze and many metals. If we take bronze, there are two coins, very familiar to all of us. One brand new as it comes from the mint, bright and shiny. The other coloured by what is called patination. This is the effect of wear, handling, everything that metal goes through in normal daily use. And the quality of a bronze, an old bronze, is exactly that. It's that word patination. Now, patination can either be, as in this case, a medal formed in the factory or in the foundry by the artist, and this is the colour that the artist in the foundry wanted it to be. It doesn't weather, it doesn't wear, it stays like that.
So if someone starts trying to polish that, they're making a grave error.
They're destroying it. They're destroying the artistic integrity, they're destroying the value. The whole thing becomes a meaningless object. And the detail is polished away as well.
What's happened here?
Now here, with this door plate, we can see all over there is a variation of colour. Now this has occurred quite naturally. It's occurred by weather, by corrosion, by people handling it, by all the things that it goes through in over years. This is a 19th century piece, it's been around for a long time. An archaic bronze buried for centuries, of course, has a wonderful patina, which is the effect of the earth on it.
So the patina actually adds value?
Yes, it does. Bronze on its own is a rather bland material. Patina adds enormous value.
So what's happened here?
Now, these are pieces where cleaning has taken place. This one, which would have looked like this, has ended up even, flat, dull. All the colour and interest has gone out of it. And cleaning has taken away everything that one would want of any quality in that bronze. And with this one, it's even worse. This would have been, this Oriental bronze, started out with wonderful tonality and colour and richness, and over the years, maybe over 50 years, a long time, constant polishing has removed anything that would have given that an appeal.
Now, it's very odd, this, isn't it? Because most people would think that that was the way it should look. I mean, they're passionately fond of spring cleaning and so on.
Quite innocent.
And they innocently polish away and end up...
I must have this shiny.
I must have it shiny.
But what they've got to remember is that every time you polish any metal except gold, you are removing the surface. All proprietary cleaners are effectively corrosive, or in one way or another.
Now, is this absolutely an invariable rule? It applies not just to bronzes we're discussing now, brass, silver, all these metals with the exception of gold?
Yes. Effectively, if you polish any metal, you are polishing away metal. If you keep going, eventually, after a very long time, you'll end up with nothing.
Oh, thank you very much.
I know my father inherited them from an uncle who lived in Portugal, and we think he bought these 4 from auction in Portugal in about the 1950s. I think they're tea jars, and the square ones are square so they could fit the maximum number in the hold.
Good. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Yeah, they are. They're exactly what you say. They're tea jars, either the cylindrical or the square ones. The funny thing is that these shapes are not Chinese shapes at all.
They're not?
No, because in fact the square form comes from way back in the 17th century, when the Dutch were making glass vessels to go in ships of the same sort of size, so exactly to fit into grids. These are made in the second quarter of the 19th century, from between 1825 and 1850. And there are, if you look at them, you can see that the subjects on the cylindrical ones and the square ones are much the same.
Yeah.
This one down here, for example, has the little man crossing a bridge. And you can see that, in fact, he's got what looks like a sort of an axe or something above it. It's actually a parasol. And it's because this is the sun peeping down from here.
Yeah.
And these are clouds. I think they're marvellous objects with this continuous scene around them. But there are other little bits and pieces we could look at. For example, the collar on here. This is rather strange looking. It looks like almost like a mask. But in fact, it's sometimes called a cloud collar, or can look like what is like a collar on a vestment. In fact, it's based on what is called a magic mushroom, as it were, a rui head. So it's in fact a very common motif which carries on all kinds of Chinese porcelain for hundreds of years. So this is getting towards the end of it. So these vessels here are simply sort of Europeanized or westernized, whereas this one in the middle, that is actually not pottery, it's porcelain, exactly the same date as the rest of them, and it is Chinese. This is sort of mid or maybe slightly later than these, but it's certainly 19th century. So they're all Chinese porcelain made at a place called Jingdezhan in southern China. And I think this pair would probably be about £2,500 for this pair. The same, maybe a little bit more for these. The fellow in the middle, the singleton, is probably not quite so interesting, and I think maybe £400 to £600.
Okay, yeah, great.
Most people associate crossbows with Switzerland, but here we've got a very interesting English example that dates from the 1790s, early 1800s. You do get continental ones, but this cocking lever and flip-up rear sight is very much associated with these particular English ones. It's a stone bow because it shoots either small stones, pebbles, or even compressed clay pellets rather than the more normal arrow.
At what distance would you think it might be effective at?
Well, I've actually shot one of these, and I could hit a tin can with one of these easily at 45 yards.
That's right.
These were used extensively in the 19th century, and there's a book by a chap called Daniel Higson which describes the operation of these and tells you how to make new springs and also the strings for them.
Would you repair that?
Yes, if it were mine, I would get a very fine razor saw and cut that away and look to see what was wrong underneath it, and then either joint it by gluing and splicing, or perhaps a screw with a concealed top on it.
Yes.
But certainly I don't think I could live with that repair on it. Well, tell me what you paid for it.
I paid something between £50 and £75 for it in the early 70s.
Well, I think you could safely put another nought on the 50 at the moment. I've seen ones in far less good condition than this make £200, £350, and one that's got its original string is still nice and bright without any serious pitting. Very interesting to see it.
This is a copy, a very fine copy I may say, of the deluxe edition of Shackleton's Heart of the Antarctic. Tell me about the book. Are you an Antarctic collector?
Not specifically Antarctic, just expedition books. And
really?
I do try and get first editions where possible. This was a gift from my father-in-law.
Shackleton didn't get on with Captain Scott, and he decided after Scott's first expedition that he would go and try for the South Pole, and so he went off with the crew down to the Antarctic, and he didn't manage to make the pole, but he did manage to get further south than anybody else had got. And this was the expedition when he actually, they discovered the magnetic pole, all this when he was in his early 30s. Now, there were 2 editions of this book, the ordinary 2-volume one in blue cloth with silver covers, and this one, which is in vellum, which is limited to 300 numbered copies, as I'm sure you know. And this little sign here, which is the sign of the penguin, was the sign of the press, the private press that they had down in the Antarctic. They actually produced on this expedition the first book that was actually printed in the Antarctic at the sign of the penguin. They had to warm the ink with candles and all sorts of things. They had the most enormous trouble, but they produced something that is now very, very rare, the Aurora Australis, which is a little book down there. Now, this limited edition of The Heart of the Antarctic in the 2 volumes has an added bonus. It has the 3rd volume, which is signed by all the members from Shackleton right the way through to Edgeworth David and Douglas Mawson of the shore party. Yes. So these are all the people who actually went on shore and did the work. Do you know why those people signed over there and those people signed over here?
I just assumed that they'd run out of room in this page.
Well, yes, it does look like that, doesn't it? But in fact, this particular page went off to Australia because these 2 are Australian.
Oh, I see.
And they had to sign separately, so they signed separately and they sent it back. But it does have some rather nice illustrations, which were done by George Marston, who was one of the artists out there, and these were actually done in the Antarctic and reprinted here, which is rather fine. I love this particular edition of it, as I say, because it does have the extra Antarctic book with all these other wonderful illustrations that were actually conceived in the Antarctic, which I think is tremendous. And a book like this, of course, has appreciated enormously in value over the years. Certainly in the last 20 years, it's gone up enormously. Do you have any idea of its...
Well, it was valued 15 years ago for insurance purposes, and it was valued then by an antiquarian bookseller at £300. And the only increase I've made to that valuation for insurance is up to 500.
Well, I'm never sure whether you should insure books, because I think burglars go for other things other than books. But they're too heavy, for one thing.
Well, there's that. Yeah.
But the value of this now is certainly well over £2,000. It's in super condition. All the vellum is creamy, milky white. There are a few spots, but this is old age, nothing terribly serious. And it's a lovely set.
Yes, it's lovely to have, and the idea that the shore party actually signed the book, that's a nice thing.
Yes,
but I do read it.
It's very immediate.
And I use it.
It's a great read. He was actually knighted after this. He was knighted in 1909, which is when this book was produced, at the ripe old age of 35. Anyway, thank you very much for bringing it in.
I think generally it is an Orkney chair. I think perhaps it was made, some of them were made in the mainland, but generally I think Orkney, to keep out the cold winds.
To keep out the drafts, if not the actual gales. Exactly. No, that is obviously what it was made for. The interesting thing about them was, as there are no natural materials on Orkney, no trees or anything, they were made from driftwood. And the original ones, in fact, were very, very crudely made, literally from bits of wood they found on the beach. Whether they did any actual wrecking to produce the wood, I don't know if that's recorded. But no, they were made out of materials that they had to hand, which on Orkney, I understand, is very limited.
Exactly.
Lovely thing, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's very, very typical. You know, Johnny Turk portrayed as a big fat Oriental. Yeah, it's real crypto racism that was designed to get people going. But these are wonderful. I've not seen
that one. I'll be your light. I like that's great.
That really is just like my cat, who I'm convinced is a secret smoker.
Did you have any other pieces from this set? Was there anything else?
No, nothing else to my knowledge.
Because originally it would have been part of a cabaret or a solitaire being for one person, a cabaret for two, and it would have had a nice little tray to go with it, with a similar kind of decoration, and a little cup and saucer and a little milk jug. But it was actually made by the Meissen factory, which is this blue cross swords mark on the base, and that's the mark that the Meissen factory used. It's still got that lovely honey-coloured gilding, which if we look at here, you can see that lovely honey colour. Later it became much brassier and much pinker. And then this sweet little romantic scene, which was indeed, these kind of scenes were used in the second half of the 19th century, but it's the nice gilding and the lovely classical motifs that give us the date of 1835. It's also got this lovely stepped cover and a lovely double-headed mask finial. And because it's such a rare shape, and the Meissen factory is so popular still, you'd certainly, if you were ever to sell it on the open market, you'd be looking at in excess of £1,000 for the teapot.
Lots of these around. Nice object, but not terrifically valuable. Thank you very much.
I was given it by an aunt in Canada who sent it over for me as a present. I've had it for a number of years.
So when you had it, it was in this condition?
Yes.
Yes. It's known as shiboyama ware, and it's a little table screen. It's from the Meiji period, which is after 1868, probably the last few years of the 19th century. And it has two designs of shiboyama ware, which in fact is a build-up of lacquer. And on this side here, it's completely flat. It's a thinner layer of lacquer known as hirimakie. So on this side we've just got a very simple design of birds. Yes. And carved ivory frame, which is absolutely lovely. We have these silver mounts, which are also chased. So it's a serious piece of table furniture. And then we come to this wonderful part, which I think we can both see it together better like that. So on this side we have takimakie ware, which is when it's raised. This is raised lacquer work. The Japanese have 3 dreams, and they put these scenes on a lot of their furniture, on a lot of their pictures. Summer, peace, and tranquility are either Mount Fuji, an eagle, or a persimmon. And we have the most wonderful array of coloured bone. We have mother of pearl, ivory, and then these tiny little red, obviously meant to be little fruits. They're probably coral. So it's known as a table screen. Do you know what it's worth?
Not really. I got it valued last year. I was told about a few £100.
Right. Well, I think you'd be pleasantly surprised to hear that if you were to buy it in a shop, it would be worth about £5,000.
Really? I can't believe that. Oh, that's lovely.
Do you have fairies in your glen?
No.
Well, that was very unromantic of you, because this artist certainly did have fairies in the glen, and in fact that's exactly how he titled this sort of picture, because to him the fairies of the glen were the silver birches, which are those wonderful light trees. Now, do you know this artist?
No, absolutely not.
You don't know anything about this painting at all?
Not at all. It was given to my mother when they moved from one house to another house in Inverness, and then it came over to Skye when they came to Skye, and I was given it.
Well, this is, funny enough, this is a very Scottish painting from the second half of the last century by an artist called John McWhirter, and this is the frame that it was originally sold in. This is gold, and it's gilded onto the oak. So you can see the grain of the wood. If you look at most frames, Victorian frames, it's a smooth surface. Now this came out of the sort of gilding that the Pre-Raphaelites and Rossetti liked. But do you know who gave it to your mother?
Yes, it was Alec Culler from Shetland, who were in woolen manufacturers, as was my father. And maybe that's sort of the connection. Because in actual fact, Mum and Dad have got the same painting, but much, much smaller, and probably given around about the same time.
You see, it just shows you how popular and how influential and how popular that painting was at the Royal Academy, this painting, The Fairies of the Glen. It was so popular that he kept repeating it in different forms, but this is a really rather magnificent repeat, and obviously that's what the public required, and this is what made him plenty of money. But also history reverses as well, because McWhirter now is not a terribly popular artist.
Right.
Yes, it's worth £2,000 or £3,000, which is a reasonable sum of money for a present.
Yes,
but it is, you know, for somebody who was so important in his time, you would expect it to be perhaps worth, you know, maybe in his lifetime it was the equivalent of 10 times that.
Gosh.
We're interested to know what its nationality is. because some people have told us it's Dutch and somebody else has said it's Austrian.
Right, it's very categorically and straightforwardly Dutch. Absolutely typical of the best Dutch furniture of around 1750, 1760. Even be 10 years later, if it's a slightly provincial area of Holland, the main part of Holland itself, part of the Netherlands. It's got all of the details you'd expect in the middle of the 18th century in England. Rococo details, if you look at the doors here, all these wiggly sea scrolls, these lines here, are typical of that middle part to third quarter of the 18th century. In a way, the sort of thing that Chippendale was doing a few years earlier than that. But it's exactly what you expect. Architectural furniture, repeating the architecture inside with all these numerous little drawers. Very, very nicely made indeed. I mean, it's wonderful quality. What more can you ask for? But I'm just going to open the flap because, again, I want to just show how nice it is inside. You're probably used to it here, but I love this. And we've got, again, traditional things which wouldn't have been on a bureau, an English bureau of this date. This well, for example, wouldn't be there in well, really as early as 1730. It's disappeared from the English bureau.
Really?
Of course, we have secret and inverted commas drawers here. Yes. Very typical, and this lovely, again, architectural flowing shape. Beautiful colour inside. It's exactly what you want to see from a piece of 18th century, mid-18th century Dutch furniture. And the lovely shape of the bottom here, the concave, convex drawers. It's a great piece of furniture. It's got the little secret that some of these have. Surprisingly, is typical of these grand Dutch pieces of furniture. This is worth far more with this hidden canted drawers in the sides than it would be without. So it's actually better to have this early version. But there's one more feature of this which I think is remarkable. It's escaped the scalpel. Pieces like this in the 18th century were plain, either in walnut in this case, or slightly later on they'd be in mahogany. 100 years later, the Dutch revisited their high period of furniture of the 17th century, where everything was inlaid with marquetry. So a piece like this, comparatively plain, all over the surfaces, the flap, the doors, the drawers, all over, would be inlaid with flowers, tulips,
wow. Yes, I know.
daffodils.
I know exactly the sort of thing you mean.
It's fairly common. And it's taken us a long time to actually realise that those pieces are the fake or later altered pieces, and this is the original.
This is how it should be.
Have you any notion of what it's worth today?
No, I'm not sure I want to know.
I mean, the auction value of this is going to be certainly £20,000. And could easily, with the influence of Dutch furniture, the Dutch people buying their own furniture, if it made 30,000 auction, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest.
Absolutely amazing.
Well, I must say we've had a wonderful day here on Skye. The islanders showed great hospitality to Bonnie Prince Charlie 250 years ago, and obviously that tradition lives on. So our warm thanks to them. We're now back over the sea from Skye down to the Welsh border and Gwent, where we'll be at the same time next week. So until then, from all of us here in Skye, goodbye.
In fact, next week the Antiques Roadshow will be at the later time of 7:15. And next tonight on BBC One, big stars for a big show, the Royal Variety Performance.